And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara Podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Bob Davis, who has served as professor for the State University of New York for over 30 years, where he conducted research in the behavioral and neurosensory sciences. Dr. Davis has also published 3 highly popular books: The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe?, Life After Death, An Analysis of the Evidence, and Unseen Forces, The Integration of Science, Reality, and You. More recently, he has turned his book Unseen Forces into a planned documentary entitled The Conscious Connection. Dr. Davis, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Dr. Bob, before we get into all this stuff, can you just tell us about your own paranormal experiences that you have had?
Well, I retired as a professor, as you mentioned, from the neurosensory sciences, and I was reflecting in my articles and professional career, but all of that didn't prepare me for what lied beyond. I went through that so-called rabbit hole over a 6-year period. So my objective mindset of the world, shaped by those years in academia, was significantly challenged from 3, let's call it, extraordinary experiences. And each led to a book on the subject matter that was related to the experience, and it culminated in my current role as a co-producer with Dave Beatty of Dreamtime Entertainment and Wilson Hawthorne of Island Telemedia. And we're producing a film they call it Consciousness Connection at consciousnessfilm.info. And please feel free to visit and subscribe and like, and whatever way you resonate with what we're going to talk about, support in any way would be more than appreciated. But this is the first documentary that introduces leading voices from academic research in medical and scientific fields, like people you've had on your show, Jeff, like Jeff Mishlove and Gary. You haven't had Gary Nolan, but we've had him. I'm trying Jeff Long, and we have neuropsychiatrists, etc. But we talk about ESP, a lot of near-death experiences. Bruce Grayson's another one. Raymond Moody, UFO encounters, of course, life after death, out of body, medical healing. But we get at the fundamental question: what is consciousness? Of course, it's one of our biggest mysteries, and it is considered the hard question of the sciences, and you address this in many ways. In fact, in all ways, when you talk to your guests about near-death experiences and other paranormal events, you're talking about an alteration of consciousness, of course. And we're addressing that. What does that alteration do to these people? That to me is the most fundamental question. Not only the trigger in the form of these kinds of extraordinary experiences, but what it causes change, how it causes change, and what kinds of change people go through in terms of their consciousness, their self-identity, and why are these catalysts for these personal transformations and healing? So my first experience occurred in Sedona, Arizona. My wife and I were walking around one night, and suddenly I look up in the sky, about 500 feet up, I see an orange glowing orb, as round as you can be. Looked like the sun, more orange reddish. And as I'm staring at it in awe, it's still a good half mile away. It wasn't up close and personal, but it had a presence. A second one either emerged from behind it or within it, couldn't tell, and both remained fixed, stationary for a few minutes. And of course, you think of the geothermal, the atmospheric possibilities that could create that phenomena. I'm not an expert in that area, but it moved me. They suddenly winked out. I had to write a book about it. So I wrote a UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe? More of an academic 101 intro book. And it gave me the opportunity to learn more about it. But I've always been intrigued ever since I was a young kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, following the space race to the moon. How can you not be? But then, about 2 years later, I had another experience. I worked as you mentioned, the State University of New York, and one of my assistants was a woman named Anne. And we had a very strong bond, both professionally and personally as well. And we often talked about spiritual matters, life after death. On that level, we were very close, and nothing more. But then one morning around 6 a.m., I had the most extraordinary realistic dream I can imagine. I truly felt as if I was dying. I was suffering. It was more real than real, as they say, and it left me with a strong impression that my close friend Anne, who I had the strong bond with, and who I worked with for about 20 years, had died. There was no verbal communication, Jeff. It was just that strong sense of knowingness, certainty. And so had my cup of coffee, drove to work. The dream was on my mind, but I didn't think that it meant that she died. I didn't make that connection, other than the vividness of the dream was with me. But I then entered the lab, and no one had to tell me why my colleagues looked so sad. I knew why. When I looked around the room and didn't see Anne, you know, I was more than convinced. And I was told that she died at the same time that I had the vivid dream of that knowingness that she died. And until today, I'm convinced that it was her way of letting me know she passed. Um, there were far too many unusual experiences that occurred simultaneously, shall we say, for that to occur by chance. I can't compute the odds, but you think about it. I can only recall having a few nightmares as a child that seemed as real. Those childhood nightmares, Jeff, that we all have. Never had one since. I never had a dream that I recall of me dying, which I did. And I never sensed that type of information or knowingness that I had from another, which I also had at the same time. So what are the chances of having all of those things occurring, in what do you want to call it, a lucid dream at the same time of her death? When you put the pieces together, you can't quantify it, and science ignores it. Newtonian science is not designed to figure it out. But to me, that's significant, and it exceeds more than 2 standard deviations on the bell curve, if you want to get a little quantitative about it. It makes it more certain to me when I dissect it. And we often do dissect it when you try to put these kinds of pieces together. So bottom line, I wrote the second book, Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence. I had to get into the topic, cover ESP, near-death experiences, of course, etc. My third was a kind of an awakening experience. I gave some talks out in Australia, and someone invited people to have a medical healing. She did her thing, and people started having wild experiences. And for me, I lost more or less control of my body. I really felt as if I was exterior to my body. I started coughing, twitching. And my body was in control of itself, and it defied logic to me. But I had that sense of duality, more than anything else, that gave me the impression, hey, I'm not me. There is a separation, in a sense of, call it what you will, disconnection, mind body, where you can view it from a different vantage point. And which is moving in and of itself. So collectively, those all three had a profound experience when you add it up. Kind of a shift in perspective. So again, all of that culminated in me now co-producing a film, but sort of fierce determination I want to share with the world. If you can resonate with that icky theme, this concept of consciousness, they call it, which is largely what the paranormal is all about. I hate to reuse that common phrase. We have to understand, in order to understand consciousness, we have to better understand um, you altered consciousness. To better understand what's normal, we have to better understand what we consider to be paranormal. One day these kinds of experiences will be explainable in one way or another, but it may lead to something special. Certainly, again, Newtonian physics isn't going to solve that.
I don't know if you still travel in the academic circles that you had before, but what do your previous colleagues think about the work you're doing? And while you're at it, do you see any change with them coming into more paranormal viewpoints?
I'll be honest. Since I moved, I've lost communication, with the vast majority. But I wonder about that, and I'm very sensitive to stigma, especially when I post on my Facebook page, the Consciousness Connection group. If people are interested in taking a look at that, so when I post my interviews there and subject matter that you address on your wonderful podcast in all various ways and beyond, but more of an objective way. Um, and we have interesting chatter, postings on there that people are engaged in. It's a lot of fun managing it. So I haven't had any feedback, but I'm sensitive to how people would know what I'm doing. The point is, the stigma associated with it makes me hide somewhat. The fact that I'm mentioning to you what I just did is unusual because it says something about me that I think some people may interpret as, say, that guy is strange. Some people would look at that person or interpret that person, as in that negative way, in a way that's positive, meaning I don't want anything to do with that person if I should find out that to be the case. But uh, that person is wrong. But that's my problem. I think we're all sensitive to that in some way, however.
Do you think that we all experience paranormal signs during our lifetime, but we just write them off as a coincidence or something else and don't pay attention to them?
Well, indeed, I think we are quantum systems as a physical mind, physical body, as a non-physical consciousness that integrates, is symbiotic in some way, and thus we also live in a quantum world, I believe. So that is to me paranormal. Um, Quantum is paranormal. And the behavior of atomic particles, if that could be extrapolated to human behavior, certainly suggests at least that an explanation for ESP, non-locality, how information can be transferred at a distance, it could explain a lot of what we are trying to explain, like synchronicities, those kinds of common events that are meaningful to the individual, where timing and meaning occur, simultaneously, to be distinguished from mere coincidence. And it's the meaning that one must interpret for that synchronicity to have any, significance, if at all. So that kind of alteration, shall we say, of reality, an indication to us, I think, that reality is far more complex than one can imagine. I've had synchronicities that that are extraordinary, but to explain them to you really doesn't do that much. It's to the person who is experiencing it, where the emotions are rocked. My wife sends me a picture, for instance. She sends me a video, that is, when she's going into port on a cruise of Costa Rica. 2 minutes later, I'm walking somewhere down here in Florida, and I just happened to see a license plate that says Costa Rica. I've seen, I think, some license plates like that. It was rare, but it also said May, M-A-E, which also happened to be the name of our grandchild. So there was some timing and meaning, associated there, the rarity of all of that. Again, if you dissect it all, like I did prior, the point is we all have them in varying ways, and when we think about it, and that kind of common experience, it's often written off, but it shouldn't be. It's reality saying something to you, or your subconscious altering reality, altering the future, bringing it into the present, possibly a retrocausation that is giving you something to consider, a hint, a physical understanding, in a sense, that makes you aware of something that you should be aware of. Something like a gut feeling, that introspection. We can call it interoinspection. We call it interospection. The feeling in the gut. But this is another way of looking at it, a different feeling, but a message from reality.
Do
And
you
we do
think
get it in varying ways. And that filter can be varied in order to get more messages versus very little, if any.
do you think that many of us dismiss these occurrences due to the fear of thinking that we're crazy? And the more we dismiss it, we shut it down.
Yes, indeed. I think we're moving in a direction of a subtle paradigm shift in the sense that more people are coming around to understanding the possibility of likelihood of all of this. Surveys have been done showing that about a good 70% of 64 million Americans alone have had spiritual or religious experiences that have altered their life. And that probably underestimates it. So there's a lot of people that can identify with all of this. But are just, again, more unlikely to open up and discuss it with friends and colleagues, of course. That's why, you have so many viewers, for one thing, especially when it's well done in your case. So, and have enlightening guests. Nevertheless, stigma exists. When we're filming, people, like, as I mentioned, like Grayson Long and Alexander, for our film, in Consciousness Connection on consciousnessfilm.info, we ask them just that question, stigma. And all of them say just that, because we're talking to neuroscientists, psychiatrists, medical physicians, as well as experiencers, who say how reluctant they were for so long, in varying ways, of even doing research in the area, as Grayson would said. He was reluctant to mention that he's doing near-death experience research, as well as Raymond Moody, who happens to live about 40 miles from me. We've become friends, in fact, interviewing him for the film. And we have a cup of coffee every now and then, given our close proximity. He's a wonderful, wonderful individual, going strong at 80 or so, and a philosopher still, and looks at the NDE from that philosophical lens. Very interesting perspective to get that kind of dynamic insight from someone with his background. But he mentioned that intensely. But he did, in 1975, write the book Life After Life, and he coined the term near-death experience and shared death experience as well. And my experience that I had mentioned prior was indeed a shared death experience, which is rare, and where we receive information related to the process of dying, and it's that, to me, is more indicative of the continuation of consciousness after death than the NDE itself, shared death experience. And they come in so many different ways. Getting a little off the topic, I know. But the point is, that is so common, where people see mists of smoke coming from the deceased as they pass, for instance, or messages from the deceased at that time, either distant or far away. It comes in so many different forms, visual apparitions of them, either at the moment they die or soon thereafter. auditory, again, or visual. Deathbed visions, after-death communications, shared death, as in my case, during a dream state. So people, it's not unusual. How many people talk about it? When you get close to a person, as I have, at least in my experience, then I start talking about it when I feel them out and know that they're open to it. And I have opened them up to the point where then they start sharing it with me. My neighbor, dad had classic NDE, classic, what's it called, terminal lucidity, which is a very interesting phenomenon itself. But that's a form of after-death communication. But here again, hospice workers are learning not to stigmatize it. In the past, they have. It's a good question on your part. And it's no doubt part of the genre in varying ways.
Let me ask you this. If you are wearing your neurosensory scientist hat, can you explain why near-death experiencers say that the other side is more real than here?
Why? Well, from a neurosensory standpoint, it is hard to say. It really is. Other than more recent research that shows that there's a burst of energy that occurs just before death itself in the brain, of course, and that burst of energy may result in the vividness somehow of sensory of a sensory experience while the person is going through the process of an NDE. There are certainly many theories. There's no way to know. It's a very good question. But the point, the vividness, the realer than real, as people say, we can't say there's not a pure physiologic explanation, because it could be. But what we more is why are they so changed and transformed overnight from these kinds of experiences in a positive way, both mentally and physically, that medicine and psychiatry can spend many years unsuccessfully treating the same conditions. That is more important to me than the NDE itself, which obviously is extremely important. But we're looking at many different complex issues here under the umbrella of an end-of-life phenomena. We don't fully understand how to categorize all this, define all this, and get a collective understanding of this. To me, as a neurosensory scientist kind of guy, that's where I'm more or less coming from. Surprisingly, not entirely from a brain, based explanation. I can give you some physiologic diatribe of changes in spirituality and religiosity based on the removal of tumors in the brain, for instance, that would bore everybody to death, and how the default mode network can be reduced to the point where, the filter in our mind opens up, allowing us to perceive a wider view of so-called reality, making us more sensitive, possibly, to experiencing what we may call the paranormal. These are, again, very preliminary theories, and I hate to keep promoting them. But the point is, if we better define and understand these concepts, then we can develop hypotheses. What you see, and in order to prove them, better understand all of this, and write them up in research. I have, in fact, written a few articles in Edge Science and the Journal of Scientific Exploration on the UAP phenomenon, and also the Kundalini awakening and spiritual awakenings, as well as trigger events like NDEs and shared death experiences and UAP interactions, ESP, reincarnation, on and on. This Kundalini awakenings. I just had an article in Edge Science on Kundalini awakenings, which again is not. It's I don't know how common it is, but spiritual awakenings is what occurs when these kinds of facilitators, trigger events, occur. And they occur in varying ways, as I just mentioned, even meditative practices, from even psychedelic drugs. As a neurosensory guy, I'm amazed, for instance, that people who take dimethyltryptamine, a psychoactivation, we call it, ayahuasca, of course, but on Wall Street, microdose it, or maybe more than microdose it, and they experience altered beings, non-human intelligences, and communicate with them, receive messages from them. Years later, while they're still functioning behind a fancy desk at a big job, on Fifth Avenue, they still believe that that altered state of reality and the beings that they interacted with were real. That's how real it was, as you related to.
Isn't there
As
a
you
root?
observed.
Isn't there?
So you're right. It does have a remarkable impact. It's in the mind of the individual, and thus it is influential. And that's the point. Why does it? How does it transform them, influence them again overnight? And that's what Bruce Grayson told me too. I've asked that question for many years. I'm not alone. We're amazed that we see this, but you have to look carefully at the patients and study them. And science, medicine doesn't do that, doesn't research them in that way to look at before and after. It's starting to do some research. Those in the field do that. But beyond the Graysons and a few others, not as many as there should be, there lacks that. So we have to get more people with open minds in diverse areas more interested in this kind of genre. Call it what you will, the paranormal or whatever, but it all needs to contribute to a paradigm shift because it's all significant, it's all valid at some level, and it's all transformative. We have paradigm shifts. When we figured out that we revolve around the sun, and then there are germs. It caused a paradigm shift, and other things like vaccines, and certainly. IM is causing a sort of, AI is resulting in a paradigm shift as well as you make a case for emissions, carbon dioxide emissions as well. But I also think, and the point is that we can make a strong case for what we're talking about. Consciousness, the paranormal, to also can be a paradigm shift in and of itself. And here we have something that is bucking the trend. We have something that is provable, but we, as scientists within the field, need to do a better job trying to, as I mentioned before, making a stronger case, research-wise, public-wise, and collectively in terms of the importance of what we're doing and the validity of it. The problem is we're talking to a skeptical, materialistic, reductionist mindset. You talked about stigma earlier. Well, that's why we need a paradigm shift. The materialists in society are, and you can say strongly, stigmatized against this kind of genre in terms of its legitimacy, because as real as it may be, and many materialists say, okay, I don't care what the data say, I'm not going to accept it. Even if it is real, I don't care. You talk about stigma, fight that. But that's largely, not all, where the main general materialist mindset in science lies. Not necessarily physicians, but the hardcore scientists that are in charge, and Newtonian physicists that describe the reality we live in. But we have to understand that maybe there's a little bit more to our reality. I'm not talking about something dramatic here, but something that maybe that revolving around the sun was dramatic at the time. Is the paranormal relative to that in terms of the dramatic impact on society and science? Maybe. If so, so be it. But there's remarkable evidence in ESP. I can talk for hours about it. I wrote it in my books. We address it in the film, The Consciousness Connection, and consciousnessfilm.info. And ESP, Dean Radin and other leading scientists are in that area. We have interviewed, and they're going to talk about just that. So meta-analysis shows that it is indeed valid. And even the American Psychological Association confirmed that after their review of thousands of research articles in the field of clairvoyance, telepathy, remote viewing, that there's no bias, there's no falsification, that it is valid. And they wrote this up in fancy terms and published it. Now that says a lot, but that also was not, strong enough evidence, shall we say, Jeff, to be convincing to a stigmatized, skeptical, materialistic mindset.
Well,
It's not going to, in other words, be within that unified field theory of weak and strong radiation forces and electromagnetic energy and gravity. It's that you're not going to then have number 5, consciousness. I think someday you might. I think someday you should. Once we understand this aspect of reality that's more complex than we understand in this current time period. And it sounds foolish to talk about it to certainly many. I certainly wouldn't go talking about it casually with people I don't know. But, most people don't hold their inner beliefs and share it with others right away. But even so, you have to be very careful about how you approach this with others, close or far, because it crosses a religious boundary. And a lot of people in this field, too, of UFOs, for instance, and all aspects of this, look at it like a religion. And there's nothing wrong with that, but look at it spiritually. There's nothing wrong with religion. I'm not for organized religion. Let me be upfront. I'm not putting down anybody for it. But as an organized religion, don't put non-organized religion people down for their beliefs too. And I don't expect that. But nevertheless, people who are transformed. I say that because people who are transformed from these triggers go from that organized religious to more of a spiritual mindset. And people have near-death experiences. I think you've addressed this in your past interviews. People have near-death experiences are more prone to having divorce 7 years after they have their experience. I think 70% of them, on average, have a divorce, which exceeds certainly the national average for individual age groupings. But I'm sure we see more differences, more psychosocial changes. People go through dramatic changes. I don't know if I talked about that alone in terms of in heightened spirituality, positive outlook on life, a greater sense of knowingness of who they are. But it often alters their career choices. And many people leave their current profession to go into a more helping profession, one that's more, I don't know, heart-related, more caring, more helping in nature, whatever that may be to the person, more important to what the person feels is important, to help humanity. And they become closer to the ecology, more sensitive to it. Look, and a sense of that interconnectedness, oneness. After my, I don't know what you call it in Australia, awakening experience, whatever you wish to say, well, I became a tree hugger. I hiked in the woods all the time. And I literally had that feeling, I want to hug a tree. Don't ask me why. Why? The best answer is a sense of interconnectedness. Why? I have no clue. Because I had the spiritual awakening. Why? I don't know. I was transformed by it. Why? You know what I mean?
Yes.
The point is, it leads to a spiritual, what we call Graf call it a spiritual emergency, a spiritual awakening. From their awakening, these kinds of questions are asked. Why am I changed? Why do I now question everything that I do? Because I perceive reality a little differently. Why am I interconnected? Why do I feel a strong attachment to people who are more spiritual? Why is money not as important? Why am I more spiritual? Why do I like to read about spirituality and podcasts about it and yours? Before I had my experiences, I would not be doing it. Would not be writing the books. Certainly would not be doing the film. And I busted my butt in ways that I don't need to get into.
No.
Physically, flying all over the country, and that's why whatever support would be wonderful. From $1.12, to it'll be put to good use if you resonate with the theme. And I hate to even get into that, but you see the determination on my part to even mention it.
Mm-hmm.
And don't. I know it's a lot of people are turned off by hearing that, and don't expect it. Please, please. All I want you to do, much more importantly, is that I'm on your side. And look at my website, the Consciousness Connection Group, where I talk about this kind of content. If you resonate with Jeff's wonderful podcast, I think you'll find that interesting too. There's also groups that focus on near-death experiences I enjoy as well, as you and your audience, I'm sure, are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that. But it shows you also the people that we have on board who are going to appear in the film.
Wow.
Many, again, are leading people in the near-death experience or research, like Grayson and Jeff Long and Evan Alexander, to name a few.
A significant number of my experiencers, after having the near-death experience, start either seeing UFOs or even feel like they're being contacted by UFOs. And the interesting thing is they don't have a problem talking about the near-death experience. They're kind of open to that. But they seem a little hesitant talking about the UFO stuff that's following. And I just wanted to get your take on why do you think these people start having those other experiences?
It's an insightful question because it's one I asked. And when I was a member of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation, we did that survey study of over 3,200 people who've had encounters with UAPs and non-human intelligences, but a large percentage of them also had coexisting paranormal experiences, like NDEs, common, and OBEs, common. How common? 50 to 75%, around there, had both. To the point where we had to analyze just those who had the UAP and not had the NDE. If you want to get a cleaner analysis of that group who had a UAP, it was that common, and they also certainly had paranormal experiences prior to the UAP. Things, ghostly things, and a feeling too that something is going to appear in the sky. They're going to have an interaction, a knowingness. Again, as we mentioned, you can't explain it, and then something happens. Something unusual occurs. Don't ask, to that person. So to get a kind of a warning. But yes, I know people, many of you certainly do, who do have these coexisting conditions, not conditions, but experiences. It's not unusual to have more than one. Why? I ask the same question. And that's where we need to go. But to understand why, we need to develop an hypothesis, and that's difficult to do. But we have to try. And we have to study people who do have these coexisting conditions or experiences and see how transformed they are versus having just one alone. Does it make a difference? We find, for instance, in that study, people who have interactions with non-human entities and UAPs, say more than 10 times in their life, they don't want their experience to end. They view it more positively. 80% of them who have more than 10 times, 10 interactions, want it to persist versus those who have, let's say, less than 3. We put it in that group, and it's positive, but 40 to 50%. Initially, in other words, of course, it's scary. People are shocked. It takes time to be adapt. It takes time to adapt to that fearful situation. But eventually they do, to the point where they don't. 80% in another subpopulation did not want their experience to end. 80% of 1,600 people who interacted with them. Why? Here again, we have to understand the thematic content of why, of what did they experience, what was their messages. I can go into that. They talk about love and unity and interconnectedness. They talk a lot about things that we would consider as nonsense. I met blah 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 from the Pleiades, and in order to avoid war and all that blah blah blah. But much of it was the same, and it was beautiful. The point is, we can benefit. Society can benefit if everybody became more spiritual and believed in things that we would consider to be more humane. When they have these kinds of, so to speak, paranormal events, it does something to them. They become less, shall we say, egocentric, less self-centered, more focused on unity, interconnectedness, love. I hate to sound a little mushy about it, but that is a common theme. They talk about that emotion, love. I read this once. I always mention this. A woman who had she said the love she experienced during her NDE was more profound than the love she felt when she looked in the eyes of her first newborn for the first time, magnified 10 million times. That's the love she felt during her NDE. Well, it's a good way to kind of describe it quantitatively. It doesn't do anything. You get a sense of it, wow, right? But it does nothing for you, of course, emotionally. How do you relate to that unless you experience that? That changes somebody. And when people have these kinds of extreme emotions, it causes a sense of ego dissolution, and that seems to, and there could be a biological reason, open up filters in of the mind, of consciousness, allowing for one to be more perceptive of reality and other realities, where what we coexist at the same frequency and time, but at a different phase. Excuse me, at the same time and space of another reality on a chart, but at a slightly different phase, 30 degrees, 60. Man, people describe it in terms of quantum physics, and I don't pretend to be. I don't want to go there. I can try, conceptually, I kind of understand it, but I hate to talk about it. Point is, are people accessing an altered dimension? Are they? And you can't help but not answer the question: are people seeing this world differently, or seeing a different world? That's another hypothesis, and I tend to believe a lot of people are seeing a different world, truly seeing a different world. And how you're going to, that alone, if that can be validated, proven to the medical community, I think, I don't know who would take the charge, and try to engage it somehow, where it becomes more common in academic practice, in medical practice, where it can benefit individuals. For instance, if everybody who has these transformative experiences are feeling the same kinds of emotions that are more humane in nature, and that is what we see. That is what we've talked about. If everybody had that, every country, from Antarctica, I'm not a geographer, to the other side of the pole, right? It'd certainly be a better world. It'd be a world I think we much prefer over this one. And that's an answer, I think, to a major problem. That deserves a paradigm shift. That's important. But in order to prove it, it takes people like us, not me, but scientists, young people, open-minded, not biased, not non-materialists, objective though. And I've met them, at the Institute of Institute of Noetic Sciences in California. And we also went to the Rhine Institute, and we met researchers in the field. We met neuroscientists, psychologists again, who are doing practice with virtual reality and consciousness, looking at the mind and expectation, and ESP, healing at a distance. We're seeing this kind of remarkable ESP-related research going on at this organization by young, unbiased minds who impressed me when we interviewed them, as well as at Monroe Institute. And that was fabulous, talking to Russ Dunseith and the director, Alan Evans, as well, and Judith Pennington. So Eben Alexander as well. He was that neurosurgeon who had a veridical perception. And these veridical perceptions, more than anything, are dramatic in nature, to the point where they should be convincing to the medical community. If I can relate one, for instance, kind of getting off the topic, but when we were interviewing Bruce Grayson, he was talking about one veridical perception where someone who has a near-death experience receives information that could not have been obtained in the comatose state, but was later verified by an independent person to be true. People who have near-death again and out-of-body experiences have these kinds of events. So he described, for instance, and I'll provide some quotes. I'm just pulled up something here. I can see it. One of the people he interviewed was a gentleman from South Africa who was 25 years old. I'll try to be quick. But follow along. Kind of cool story. He had severe pneumonia, and he was hospitalized, and he continued to have this respiratory arrest. He couldn't catch his breath, and he had a young nurse who was his primary nurse who worked with him every day, and they had a good relationship. And then she told him one day that she's going to take a long weekend off, and that another nurse will be taking care of him. So he wished her well, sent her off. And while she was gone, he had another respiratory arrest and had to be resuscitated. While he had that arrest, he had another near-death experience. And during that experience, he found himself in a beautiful pasture. And there, to his surprise, Anita, his nurse, came walking towards me, and he did a double take and said, "Anita, what are you doing here?" And she said, "Jack, you need to go back. I want you to find my parents, tell them I love them very much, and I'm sorry I wrecked a red MGB." Now, this was back in the 70s in South Africa, and there weren't a lot of red MGBs there. So when Jack awoke, he began to tell the nurse that he saw her and the experience that she had, and she got, teary-eyed. She cried. She ran out of the room. And as it turned out, Anita had taken the weekend off to celebrate her 21st birthday. And her parents surprised her with the gift of a red MGB. She got so excited, she jumped in the car and took it for a test drive and crashed into a telephone pole. And she died instantly a few hours before her near-death experience. So it's things like that. There's no way he could have known at the time that she had died, certainly how she died, yet he did. And there's, again, you have people who talk about this. I enjoyed listening to those cases more than anything else. They used to be called Pekindarian cases. Bruce Grayson, mentioned that. Now they're called veridical perception. It's like Jeff Long, and Jeff, you had him on your show. You mentioned that,
Yes.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably told this story. I may have heard him talk about Vicky, who was blind.
I think so, yes.
She was totally blind from birth. And so vision, of course, was unknown to her. Some of your audience is certainly familiar, but for those who aren't, so you can't explain visions to somebody who's totally blind, right? Just like this extraordinary experience, you can't explain what it feels like to one who never had it. And she was involved. Vicky was involved in a car wreck while she was driving home. And she went to the emergency room and she started having an out-of-body experience during her near death. So her consciousness was above her and she's looking down at her body. And of course, her initial reaction is fright. She can't explain the visual signal information she's receiving. It's unknown, of course, to her. So she had no clue. It was only, I think, as she started touching her hair and a ring that was on her finger that she knew that it was her. But she knew something was certainly different. And she described to Jeff, as he mentioned in an interview with us, that she said, I could see in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, and in back of me. And Jeff said, how can you see in back of me? She says, yeah, I saw around, a 360 view. And he says, what are you talking about? We have eye sockets. We can only see 180 in front of us. And there's been two studies done with a small sample size, Jeff. And I can't recall who did it. It may have been Jeff, it may not have been, of 10, 12 people blind from birth who had an NDE, and 8 of them had sight, and described their environment as only one with sight can. As only one with sight can. Strongly suggesting, I'm not going to go on the limb and say proving, but again, strongly contributing to the existing body of evidence that people somehow have another sense. And we have the auditory and other senses, but we have, in other words, another sense besides even ESP, where we can possibly dissociate, leave the body, and interact with the environment in some way.
Some people who want to live forever want to be able to transfer their consciousness into another body or a machine. And I think even Elon Musk's work with Neuralink wants to hook up the internet to your brain. But I don't think any of that is possible because consciousness is non-local. And your brain is just a tool for you to experience reality here. What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that even in the near term that we can make such advances. It's something, of course, we can contemplate. It's something that I still think is science fiction, but he thinks big, and his ego is oversized, and like, I can do anything. I can fly to the moon, Mars, Venus, you name it. I can do anything. Invincible. And some people have that. And some people are tremendous achievers, but can go overboard. And I think he's going overboard, in other words, with this concept. The brain, yeah, is indeed quantum. We live in a quantum world. And we've proven recently that quantum systems can exist in warm, wet environments, which the brain does. And the only way that the brain can possibly do what it's capable of doing with its 100 or so billion neurons, and way more than that, synaptic connections, well, let's put it this way: you need a computer the size of the United States, you know, to just get at a small piece of what the brain can do. How can that brain, in other words, not be a quantum system? Now, until we develop a quantum system to allow the brain to possibly integrate with it, I'm not concerned. I'd be concerned, however, if that someday becomes a possibility, as remote as it sounds. I don't know how you upload memory. The point is, I don't necessarily think much of what we are is in the brain. So what are you uploading? It's like you're uploading the analytic robotic aspect of the physicality, maybe physical events. We don't even know conclusively where memory is stored in the brain. Not that it's not, but the point is, much of us may not be. That's again something that we need to understand as we understand more of reality. What is consciousness? Is it independent of the brain, in other words? And thus, if it is, how are you going to upload that into a computer? Well, you can't. And good luck, Elon Musk, So the point is, what are you going to upload? Android, and that's worse. but I don't know what it would be like. Think of the incredible position of having you being uploaded into a computer, and you knowing that you're in a computer. You talk about locked in syndrome, and wanting to get out. It's not a walk in the park, literally and figuratively, but the horror of that. Think of what is he trying to achieve? So that when the body is dead, you're preserved. Is that where he's going? So the spouse can still have you, but you press a key if you want me or not. If you have an argument, pull the plug. I don't know. I don't know the implication. And I don't know the implication of what we're talking about. The application, one application, I should say, however, is the transformation and this change in people and resulting betterment of humankind, which can only be positive for collective survival. And I think if everyone ascribed to that, and you can't put it in a pill and give it as a prescription. It'd be nice to, but it seems to come in the form of these kinds of experiences, especially long term, especially once you get through that spiritual crisis that many people have following it in varying ways. Some people don't, some people do. But long term, you lose the ego somewhat, and that's critical. A critical, shall I say, facilitator of good things. And the symptoms from that lead you to a more transcendent state. You have a long way to go. We all do. But many things that we can do, like listening to your podcast, talking about spirituality, reading, doing everything, more engaged with the topic. And meditating is something I love to do. And I'm a big advocate for that, even for 20 minutes a day. I know it's hard to find the time. Some days I like to do it twice. Some days I can't. But, it's like jogging. I can't even jog anymore with a bad back, but everybody's got issues, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard to carry luggage when I'm flying to the West Coast, waking up at 2 in the morning in pain. But the point everybody can complain. I know, and please don't interpret me wrong. Point is, I'm trying to emphasize here my determination to do the film and get the message out to the point where my back, yeah, it was killing me at 2, 3 in the morning. Had to pop a pill and go back to sleep. And it was agonizing. But I went to Noetic Sciences that Dr. Edgar Mitchell founded, and synchronistically, I was a member of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation. And I wrote that article with a few others, like Dr. Rudy Shield and Dr. Russ Galpone, and we published it again in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And we represented Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And then, synchronistically, I don't know, maybe not, I was with my co-producers, Dave Beatty, just Dave Beatty at the time, and we visited and interviewed several people there, like Lloyd Auerbach and Cedric Kennard, and I forget a name, excuse me, a few other people, channeling medium, the director of Institute of Noetic Sciences. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. So that was a wonderful experience. And how much of that is coincidence? Where again, there's overlap, obviously, in Dr. Edgar Mitchell. It led me. If I didn't have my experiences, I would not be filming, which means I would not be gone to ions. So that led me to a synchronistic event. Is that telling me what's the message there? Do the film? Or am I making a message up? Well, you know what? If I believe that's the message, that's the message. And maybe the message, if that is, maybe that should do something for me. Like he's telling me, go for it, Bob.
Mhm.
You got a few more years left. You're in the seventh inning of life, so to speak. I just hit 70. What the hell else do I got to do? I play a little chess. I watch. I'm into the series Breaking Bad. It's pretty good. I'm not big into TV or series, but my son told me to watch it, and I am. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And not advocating manufacturing methamphetamine, that's for sure, but it makes a good, interesting backdrop of characters. But nevertheless.
Well, if we get back to your experiences for a moment, especially the one with you seeing the orbs, in your opinion, what is an orb? Is it a ball of consciousness or something else?
Well, Jeff, it's a good question. I don't know. And because I don't know, there's no definition. I've researched it. I see different interpretations of it, and that's again a limitation of our field. We lack just that definition of much of this, not all. We've made a lot of progress in near-death experiences, again, thanks to Grayson, Long, etc. Still, we need more people involved, many more, again, from different disciplines. Likewise, looking at orbs. We interviewed, by the way, Gary Nolan at Stanford University, who co-founded the Soul Foundation. We talked to him about consciousness and, of course, the UAP situation. Very interesting conversation. He's going to appear in our film, The Consciousness Connection. And if I may say, the consciousnessfilm.info, if I may plug again. But the point is, we're getting different perspectives of what this is. And he and I had a conversation. Personally, we've talked many times, privately, and he and I even appeared on a podcast, and we did a show, and we were both the guests. And we talked just about that. I mentioned that. What's an orb? I asked the same question, as I recall. We don't have a definition. And Gary said, that intrigues me more than what a structured craft is. if you think about it, and these structured craft may, I don't know if they're all advanced weapons that we can't even conceive flying around. Who the heck knows? Holographic representations from photonic laser emissions off of Nazi ships, as false images. Who the heck knows? Patented themes galore. You'd be amazed at what's out there. That black ops program, these unacknowledged access programs are involved with, whether or not it's reverse engineering and aliens. I don't want to even touch that. We get into that with Gary a little bit, and he to us, he's had no answer, of course. Regarding orbs, again, more fascinating to him. Well, both have been fascinating to me, and he's had a UAP experience with an orb. A series of it was structured craft, Jeff, over his house one early morning. A series of lights, as he described it, but he did recall seeing a structured craft against the dark sky. Mine, I didn't see a structured craft. For all I know, who knows? But again, what is it? Consciousness? I ask that question to people. I get that answer. Oh, it's an easy answer. Well, what is consciousness? Okay. It's you. Okay, it's another life form. Well, something. I buy that. I can. The plasma is a fourth state of matter. It comprises a dark matter, which comprises 95% of the universe, something like that. We don't understand it. Plasma physics is studied but poorly understood. It resembles so closely things that are described as UFOs. If people look at the details that have been done with plasma atmospherics, splitting in two, disappearance of lights, I go on and on. It looks intelligent. It looks purposeful. It does the angle maneuvers, all of that. So it looks like UFOs. I'm familiar with some research that's out in the that has Dallin Lights. I forget his name. Who's done research? Looks at these lights that always occur there and interprets them as synchronistic events. He says they seem to be purposeful and do have a willingness to interact with humans. That's what his conclusion was. The same conclusion was reached by another person, Dr. I can't remember his name, Dr. Harvey something, in Kansas in the 90s. He did research studying orbs. And after many years of research, both were astrophysicists. And I'm sorry, I don't have their names. Came to the same conclusion. They show a form of intelligence. That's my best answer for you, Jeff.
Right.
Not what do I know? Here are two experts, so to speak, and they could be wrong. But that's the independent experts, astrophysicists, looking at the same phenomena. You think these light orbs in different parts of the world, coming to essentially the same conclusion. Remarkable. And I encourage people to look at the Hasdallan lights. It's going to bother me later. I'm going to remember the gentleman's name. The name will come up if you Google Hasdallan lights. And the other lights in Kansas, and just the name for that too, not surprisingly, and I can't recall what that might be.
Well, I checked out the trailer to your movie on YouTube. And is the movie finished or is it still a work in progress?
No, it's still a work in progress. We're going to do a few more interviews and certainly more editing, and that's why more support, of course, is needed to complete it. But another year and a half, it should be streamed. And how successful it is, that's not the point. And it's important for the audience to understand that it's not about making money. It's about getting the word out. And only after you have these kinds of experiences do you come to that realization, especially at my age and my co-producers' age, Dave Beatty and Wilson Hawthorne. Not that they're, elderly gentlemen, but I'm older than them. I'm retired. Yeah, it's not about making money. I'm fine. It's about, and I hate to use the term waking people up, to enhance awareness, to make people more aware that reality is far more complex than one can imagine, and not to feel that talking about their personal experiences in these varying ways that we've addressed close to your chest all the time. You should be able to feel open about it with and confide about it with certain people, like you would about anything else. But the point is to talk about it, and if necessary, get counseling with somebody who can understand what you experienced, and that can be hard to find.
Yes.
And I say that with great sincerity because I didn't do that. If I was afraid, Jeff, that if I did go to a site, I had a lot of anxiety from it. You do go into this, why me? What happened? What does it mean? All the obvious questions and beyond. What is reality? All of that. Why am I hugging a tree, as I mentioned? Questions you never can imagine. Why am I speaking this way about spirituality?
What are you working on that you want people to know about besides the film?
I'm working on another book that's going to coexist with the film, that talks about the film, gets into the interviews in more detail and topic matter, like consciousness, like spiritual awakening, like even autistic savants who demonstrate ESP in remarkable ways. 5 year olds who speak 6 different languages, for instance. That areas of certainly near death, out of body, end of life, yeah, on and on. Quantum physics, theories, science. So UAPs, but tie that in, integrate it, juxtapose it with, here again, leading scholars who we interviewed. So you get a more personalized version in a narrative. It'll come out in an ebook uh, uh, of this topic matter, but also not only include information from leading scholars who were interviewed, but also experiences who we interviewed, which is more important, and tie that together into a narrative that's entertaining, educational, informative. And that's what we intend to do. But in order to do that, the editing, again, it takes support. And more importantly, it takes an understanding that this is an important mission for certainly a lot of people. Why are you doing what you're doing? There's something that transformed you among other people. Why are people, you survey everyone in your audience and ask them one question. Well, maybe more than one, but I have a lot of questions to ask if you want to do research. Um, Besides, what is consciousness? Why are you listening to this podcast? Not only because Jeff's a great interviewer and you love the show and a great guest. Not because of all that stuff. The topic matter that he brings forth. Why do you resonate with it? What ask him that question,
Yeah.
and then have you ever had an unusual experience, transformative experience, and if so, how did it transform you? You'd be surprised what percent of people alone, even if you just got 10, 20%, I'm sure it's far more than that, who's agreeable with that.
Yeah. I think it would be
That's
much
a
higher.
lot of people.
Yeah.
And from that population, then you can start asking more questions. Again, the thematic content described your experience. What was it about it that changed you? And again, did it make you sport more? But dig deeper, of course. Just dig deeper. You could ask for a million questions. We did that and published that in our own way, which also included near-death experiences, which was, again, regardless of the type of. But that's what what I like to do is, so getting back to that question, I'm writing a book to finish that question earlier. Just writing a book. I'm not golfing like a normal individual. You know,
Well, you
getting
are
ready.
in Florida. You could be golfing.
I hike a lot, but right now I'm getting a neuromodulator for my back. That's going to take care of my pain, so I can travel across country if necessary in less discomfort. I'll be fine. But I'm doing fine for my age. I'm doing wonderful, really. Other than a bad back, and that comes from hiking in the mountains in the beautiful Adirondacks. I used to hike with the backpacks, spend a lot of time out there with my son. Best time in the world, 8, 9, 10 years of age, but it does have a toll. And then you run. I'm getting way off topic, and you can edit this out, Jeff. But and many people are turning it off. I'm sorry, but then I became a jogger. And did every day for 3 miles, regardless of the weather in northern New York. And man, was it cold in New York. But point is, what I'm trying to make is, I always thought I was about UFOs, even as an academician, writing articles and such, and I would share it with a close associate of mine who worked in the lab with me, and he did not agree. He couldn't believe I wrote the book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe? He couldn't believe it. And his colleagues in the physics department, we once had lunch, and I brought it up, and I'll tell you, they looked at me like I was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm serious. I'm
I know.
serious. Well,
that makes
wrote it
me.
off. They wrote it off as something and looked at me like I'm crazy. Why you bother?
When you say that, it makes me think of the question, since you're so interested, do you think you were an ET previous to this life?
If I was an ET previous?
Yeah. In your last incarnation, were you on the Pleiades or somewhere else?
I've been told certainly that's a possibility. That's what makes people more innately curious. We could be influenced genetically from our past. We could influence in an incarnate way, as you mentioned. I have no vivid recollection. I could talk about Ian Stevenson's work that kind of gets into that. We visited too his library at the University of Virginia, where he did reincarnation research in over 1,500 young kids. I was tempted to get a regression, but ever since I can remember as a young child, but the thing is, kids who are anywhere from 3 to 8 will remember their past life. It's far more unusual to have a past life recall beyond that. Adults do, with accuracy, but it's still rare. And there are many cases that are perplexing, but nevertheless, you want that vertical perception in a reincarnation case. So, I don't know.
Well, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to the public for that?
Yeah, of course.
What's the best way to contact you?
My email is davisri57@yahoo.com. That's davisri57@yahoo.com.
All right.
And my website is bobdavisspeaks.com, bobdavisspeaks.com. And again, the film, The Consciousness Connection at consciousnessfilm.info. And my Facebook page is the Consciousness Connection Group.
And I'm assuming they can find all your books on Amazon if they want to learn more about them.
Yeah, and I would encourage more unseen forces, the integration of science, reality, and you. The film was largely more based on that one, and I'll get a very weak, small cup of coffee for each. It's not a point of you know how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you all for the consideration, everybody. Thank you.
Sure. Well, before we finish up, Can you leave us with one last positive message?
I have great respect for all of you who are on this journey, who are becoming more spiritual, who have a mindset that is more open, more honest and true, uh, that you're curious. And I respect that curiosity trait in people. As long as you're humane and caring and loving to others, and have good karma. But curiosity is something that really moves me. And the fact that you're engaged deeply with Jeff, and on other podcasts in this area, tells me that you are. So I commend you, and just want to say that keep going. It'll help over time, allow you to become more awakened, more aware, and you'll benefit it. You'll benefit in life in many ways, and you'll see how you will. It's more experiential than anything else, and you'll help others as well in the process.
Dr. Davis, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. Anytime.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.